Welcome to the History AI podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Welcome to the History AI podcast, where history comes alive with every episode. I'm Chuck, and joining me today, as always, is Marco. How's it going, Marco?
Doing great, Chuck. Excited as always, especially for today's dive into a somewhat overlooked but fascinating episode from World War I, the Battle of Lake Naroch.
Absolutely, Marco. And before we get started, a quick reminder to our listeners, if you enjoy our journey through history, please take a moment to rate, subscribe, and share our podcast. Every 5-star review helps us reach more history buffs like you.
And don't forget, we've got some cool History AI podcast merchandise available now. Check out the link in the show notes to grab yours.
Today, we're winding the clocks back to 1916, deep into the heart of World War I. Picture this: Europe is a continent in turmoil, the great powers of the day locked in a devastating conflict that spans several fronts.
That's right, Chuck. By 1916, the war had bogged down into a brutal war of attrition. The Western Front is infamous for its trench warfare, where miles of fortified trenches stretched from the North Sea to Switzerland, encapsulating a deadly stalemate.
Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, where our story unfolds today, the situation was somewhat different. The front lines were more fluid, and the armies covered vast areas due to the sheer size of the territories involved.
The Russian Empire, grappling with internal strife and enormous casualties from earlier battles, was under pressure to achieve a significant military victory. Tsar Nicholas II and his high command were desperate to bolster morale and prove Russia's capability to its allies, particularly France and Britain.
In this context, the Russians planned a major offensive aimed at the German forces. This operation was intended not just as a strategic military maneuver but also as part of a broader Allied strategy.
Exactly, Chuck. The French were enduring relentless pressure from the Germans at Verdun on the Western Front. The Russian offensive near Lake Naroch was intended to force the Germans to divert troops from Verdun to the east, easing the strain on the French.
So, with high stakes and the eyes of their allies upon them, the Russian army geared up for what they hoped would be a war-defining offensive. The stage was set near Lake Naroch in what is now Belarus, a region characterized by its dense forests and marshy terrain, which would soon play a critical role in the unfolding battle.
That's our backdrop, folks. What followed was a series of events that combined high hopes with tragic miscalculations. But more on that as we dive into the Battle of Lake Naroch.
Now, let's delve into the specifics of the Battle of Lake Naroch. Initiated on March 18, 1916, this offensive was one of the first major Russian operations of the year, and it was marked by a formidable artillery barrage that was intended to soften German defenses.
Right, Chuck. The Russians amassed a huge force for this assault, approximately 350,000 men, supported by over 500 pieces of heavy artillery. The plan was straightforward: bombard the German lines, create chaos, and then send in the infantry to break through.
However, the execution was far from effective. The artillery, though plentiful, was poorly coordinated. Due to the challenging weather conditions and the marshy ground, many of the shells failed to reach their targets, leaving the German fortifications largely intact.
And speaking of weather, Chuck, it played a cruel part in the Russian plans. The offensive was launched in early spring, when the thaw turned the battlefield into a muddy quagmire. The Russians hoped the cold would hold, keeping the ground frozen and more navigable. Unfortunately, a premature thaw turned the terrain into deep mud, impeding the movement of Russian troops and artillery.
As the Russian infantry advanced, they found themselves not only facing unyielded German machine gun nests but also struggling against the elements. The mud was so thick that men literally got stuck, becoming easy targets for German gunners.
Despite these adversities, the Russian soldiers pressed on. Over the next few days, waves of Russian troops continued to attack, but the gains were minimal and came at a great cost. The German defenses, designed with deep, fortified positions and barbed wire, repelled most of the Russian advances.
The Germans, commanded by General Otto von Below, utilized a defensive tactic known as elastic defense. Rather than holding the front line at all costs, they would absorb the Russian onslaughts, allow them to overextend, and then counterattack at opportune moments. This approach effectively blunted much of the Russian offensive.
By March 21, the battle had reached a critical point. Russian morale was waning, and their initial numerical advantage was diminishing due to the high number of casualties. The offensive sputtered as supply lines struggled to keep up with the demand for ammunition and reinforcements.
In the days that followed, the fighting turned into sporadic skirmishes, with both sides exhausted by the conditions and the relentless combat. By the end of March, the Russian command had to face the harsh reality that the offensive had failed to achieve its strategic objectives.
It's a sobering reminder of how crucial factors like coordination, weather, and timing are in military operations. The Battle of Lake Naroch stands as a stark example of an ambitious plan that fell victim to logistical nightmares and environmental hardships.
As we move further into the story of the Battle of Lake Naroch, it's important to highlight the individual acts of valor and the tactical approaches that marked this intense conflict.
Indeed, Chuck. Amidst the harsh conditions and the tactical missteps, there were numerous instances of extraordinary bravery. One such hero was Sergeant Mikhail Petrov, a platoon leader who managed to rally his men to capture a key enemy machine gun post under heavy fire. His actions not only disrupted the German firing line but also inspired his fellow soldiers during a critical phase of the battle.
That's a fantastic story, Marco. Another example is Captain Anna Yegorova, a field nurse who repeatedly braved the no-man's land to rescue wounded soldiers from both sides of the fight. Her courage under fire saved dozens of lives and serves as a poignant reminder of the human spirit prevailing in the darkest of times.
Shifting focus to tactics, the Russian strategy at Lake Naroch was primarily based on the use of overwhelming artillery fire followed by massive infantry assaults. This approach, while straightforward, was fundamentally flawed given the conditions on the ground and the well-prepared German defenses.
Absolutely, Marco. The German troops employed a defense-in-depth strategy, which was quite effective. They had multiple lines of trenches and fortified machine gun nests, designed to absorb the initial impact of the Russian artillery and then counter the following infantry waves.
And the Germans also made significant use of counter-battery fire. They had positioned their artillery in locations that were hard to detect and strike, allowing them to effectively neutralize much of the Russian artillery before it could inflict substantial damage.
On the Russian side, there was also an attempt to innovate under duress. Midway through the battle, Russian commanders tried to adjust their tactics by concentrating their forces for more targeted attacks and using smaller, more maneuverable artillery units to support advancing troops directly.
Yet, these tactical shifts came a bit too late and were insufficient to turn the tide. The entrenched German positions and the relentless defensive fire continued to inflict heavy casualties on the Russian forces.
This battle thus serves as a critical study in the evolution of military tactics during World War I, illustrating the limits of traditional mass assault tactics against modern, well-prepared defensive positions.
And it's a testament to the courage of those who fought, adapting and persevering in face of overwhelming odds.
Now, let's discuss the aftermath and the broader impact of the Battle of Lake Naroch. Although the immediate military outcomes were less than favorable for the Russians, the long-term effects and lessons learned had significant implications.
That's right, Chuck. In the immediate wake of the battle, the Russian High Command had to contend with stark realities. The offensive failed to achieve its strategic objectives. It did not significantly divert German forces from the Western Front, nor did it alleviate the pressure on the French at Verdun.
Moreover, the casualties were staggering. Russian losses amounted to about 100,000 men, including killed, wounded, and missing. The German casualties were considerably lower, estimated at around 20,000. This disparity highlighted the inefficacy of the Russian tactics employed during the battle.
And beyond the numbers, there was a profound impact on Russian morale. The failure of the Lake Naroch offensive exacerbated discontent among the troops, contributing to the growing unrest that would eventually lead to the Russian Revolution in 1917.
Absolutely, Marco. However, it wasn't all in vain. The battle served as a painful but necessary lesson in the need for modernization and tactical innovation within the Russian military. It exposed the critical weaknesses in logistics, command structure, and strategic planning.
Indeed, and in response to these lessons, the Russian military began to adapt. Later offensives, though still fraught with challenges, showed signs of improved tactics and better use of artillery and reconnaissance. The use of shock troops, or special assault units, began to take shape, reflecting a shift towards more modern combined arms tactics.
On a broader scale, the Battle of Lake Naroch influenced Allied military thinking as well. The High Command on the Western Front took note of the failures and successes of the Naroch offensive, incorporating these lessons into their own strategic planning. This was evident in the more coordinated and sophisticated Allied offensives later in the war.
The battle also had a geopolitical impact. It underscored the limitations of the Russian Empire's war effort and highlighted the urgent need for support, which influenced the Allies' decision to increase economic and military aid to Russia.
Ultimately, while the Battle of Lake Naroch may be seen as a tactical failure, it played a crucial role in the evolution of military strategy during World War I. It forced a re-evaluation of existing military doctrines and spurred innovations that would have lasting effects on the conduct of the war. As we close today's episode on the Battle of Lake Naroch, let's reflect on its enduring legacy and how it has continued to influence both military strategy and historical scholarship.
Definitely, Chuck. While the battle itself might not have ended in a tactical victory, its long-term effects on military tactics and strategic planning cannot be understated. It's a profound example of how lessons learned from the hardships of war can lead to significant shifts in military doctrines and practices.
That's right, Marco. The battle also serves as a poignant reminder of the human cost of war. The massive casualties suffered in the Naroch offensive brought home the brutal reality of World War I's trench warfare and led to greater efforts to improve battlefield medicine and logistics.
Moreover, the Battle of Lake Naroch helped set the stage for later developments in the Russian Revolution and the subsequent changes in Russian society and governance. Its outcomes helped fuel the discontent that eventually led to the overthrow of the Tsarist regime.
It's a stark reminder that history is not just about battles and treaties, but about the real human experiences and societal transformations that shape our world. Each episode we bring to you aims to explore these deep, multifaceted narratives, ensuring that every episode is evergreen, timeless in its content, and always relevant.
And with that, we encourage all of you to share this podcast. If you found today's episode enlightening or thought-provoking, please share it with someone who loves history as much as you do. It's your support that helps us keep bringing these stories to light.
Indeed, every share, every interaction helps us grow and continue to bring you analyses of history's most compelling moments. Don't forget to follow us on social media, rate us on your podcast app, and maybe drop a suggestion for a future episode. We love hearing from our listeners.
Thank you once again for joining us on the History AI podcast. We hope this episode has added a new layer to your understanding of World War I and its wide-reaching impacts.
Until next time, keep the past present, and remember, history is not just about the past, but a crucial guide to our future. Thanks for listening, everyone.
See you next episode.
Looking for the perfect way to show appreciation for the incredible mom in your life? Discover Exhausted Moms, a coloring journey to relaxation and humor, the coloring book that speaks directly to the heart of motherhood. Gift her an escape into pages of laughter, empowerment, and moments of tranquility. With Exhausted Moms, she'll find a blend of whimsical illustrations and inspiring quotes that celebrate her daily triumphs and challenges. Crafted with love from images I created for the mother of my children, each page offers a space for creativity and relaxation, a reminder that she's doing an amazing job, even on the toughest days. Give the gift of laughter, peace, and recognition. Exhausted Moms isn't just a coloring book, it's a hug, a nod of understanding, and a token of appreciation for everything she does. Surprise her with Exhausted Moms today and watch her face light up with joy. Because every mom deserves a moment to herself, wrapped in the colors of love and support.